This podcast is brought to you by the Disabled But Not Really Foundation, a local Kansas City nonprofit organization that pushes to instill a physical limitless mindset that breeds courage, confidence, and competence within the disabled community. You can follow and support Disabled But Not Really on social media or go visit their website at disabledbutnotreally.org. Their work and their mission is to really impact communities and make more people understand the benefits of inclusivity.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Sunday morning. We are so happy you're here. And I'm smiling because Wes has me laughing. I'm April Jackson from Sunday Safe Spaces, and my co-host is Wesley Hamilton. And go ahead, Wes, say it.
The Chiefs won the Super Bowl. I mean, that's the best way you can put it. Yeah, we won that thing. And nobody believed that we would win. So I think that's a great way to anyway, what's up, everybody? It's Wesley Hamilton. I'm going to go back down a little bit, because, of course, as much as I want to celebrate the win, I will be and acknowledge, since we do use this platform as a safe space, to make sure that we address some of the things that happened within our celebration of the Super Bowl, which was very tragic. And so our condolences goes out to the families that were affected. And those are one of the things that kind of spearheaded these conversations was the gun violence within communities. And, we're talking about exploring justice and equality during Black History Month. So yeah, just wanted to make sure. Yeah, I'm happy because we won it back to back, but we got a lot of work to do here in Kansas City, y'all. And, just to be frank. And so as much as I want to celebrate, I'm a huge advocate for the things that we're trying to, things that we saw. These conversations are based on that. How do we change the paradigm and the way that things are being seen and how individuals in certain communities see life? Yeah. Because it is affecting everyone. And we got to see it on national television. So bring that awareness. But all that to say, I'm grateful for this conversation today. We do have our guest today, Dustin Gibson. Is that what you prefer to be called, or do you got
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, Dustin, thank you for joining us today. It's an honor. So
Thank you. I appreciate y'all having me.
Welcome to our platform. We have a lot of stuff to talk about. Wes, I want to circle back to what you're talking about with Kansas City, the gun violence, the trauma, even for you, that's your space. That's what happened to you, right?
Yeah.
So we can circle back to that for sure, because we've talked a lot about how gun violence directly disables folks, right? And how it is so preeminent in the Black community. So when we talk about disability rights and disability justice, it affects every single one of us. And I'm really glad we started off with a moment of joy. I was listening to Rich Roll's podcast by he was interviewing Dr. Ellen Langer, and she was talking about mindfulness. And Dustin, that's a big key of our platform, is centering things around mindfulness. And one thing she said is, think about who you are when you're in a joyful space. And when you are in a joyful space, you're often liberated. You're often free. You feel like your childlike self. So I'm glad we had a little laugh and we had a little joy, and we celebrated the Chiefs winning and me laughing at it because I'm so happy for them. Yet my little California heart's a little hurt. But it's all good. So Dustin, we want to introduce you to everyone. We're on all the platforms. I think we're on LinkedIn, we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook. I don't know if we're on IG Live, but we're on Wesley's platforms. We're on Open Up. So this is also going to be evergreen. So we want to expose people to your work. You do a lot of work in the disability space. You do a lot of work with prisoners and prison abolition, which I want to talk about that because I really appreciated you correcting me. And I want you to be able to share, what's the difference between people advocating for prison reformation as opposed to prison abolition. But before we get all that, first of all, I want to say Dustin is here in Pittsburgh. And can you introduce yourself to the people, share what you do and what brought you to the causes that you work in and you advocate for?
Word. I appreciate that. I should say too, I'm not in Pittsburgh anymore. I'm in Baltimore.
All right. We like that. Nice.
But I was in Pittsburgh for a good amount of time, like a decade.
Now, where are you from?
I'm from Wyoming.
Wow, awesome.
Like got further east.
I like it.
Okay, first of all, I've never met anybody from Wyoming. So this is an honor for me because I've been saying I want to go to Wyoming. We'll get to that in a minute, but I just want to say, like, appreciate that. But then this conversation, this is really good for me. I'm telling you, I've never met nobody from Wyoming. So
he's our traveler. He is our traveler. So awesome. Okay, Wyoming, Pittsburgh, Baltimore.
I'm thinking about like even the conversation you were talking about earlier with like the gun violence piece. Like Wyoming is the state that has the most guns like per capita. So it's the highest gun ownership in the nation, and it's like the least amount of like gun violence instances, like one of them. But I got like ideas around like how it's that way. But yeah, I'm from Wyoming. I grew up there. My people are from St. Louis, Kinloch specifically, which is like it's the first all black town in Missouri. We're the first all black town incorporated in Western Mississippi. Border to Ferguson. So a lot of the people that got displaced from Kinloch ended up going to like North County, St. Louis, like Ferguson, Hazelwood, all those places. And I mentioned that because when I was in Pittsburgh in 2014, that's when Michael Brown was killed, and then like Von Derek Myers and other people in St. Louis was. And I mean, we was just in St. Louis like 2 weeks before. So that like place, like I'm very familiar with. So I think that was the thing that like wholeheartedly brought me into movement, is to see my people, to know my cousins was trying to get home pregnant and tanks was on their street and the military was out there. And then to see like my people resist in that way was beautiful and also like devastating. So I was in Pittsburgh at the time, and then that's when I was like, okay, I'm in this thing around policing and prisons. Up until that point, like I think my story is similar to a lot of Black people. Everybody I know has been incarcerated for the most part. Everybody I grew up with has gone to jail at least once. Both sides of my family, uncles, cousins. So it was something that I was like intimately familiar with, just like the amount of like interaction we have with like police. I have like all the stories of, getting pulled over, getting cuffed, and all the shit that police officers do. But I was working at the Center for Independent Living in Wilkinsburg, which is like a little borough outside of Pittsburgh. And that is ran for, and it's governed by disabled people at all levels. At a time, like, I would say that it was a radical type of philosophy, the independent living philosophy that grew out of like deinstitutionalization movements of like the 50s and 60s, where people were getting folks out of warehouses or institutions or state hospitals that held disabled folks. They were help getting people free and then like setting up community support. So it's out of that lineage that like I was like operating in. So at that time I was like super underqualified for my position. I was like an IT supervisor. I didn't know shit about IT. So I started like running like a bunch of programs around like, how do we use tech as disabled people? How can we support folks that are coming out of institutions to be able to use phones, computers, transportation? And yeah, when Ferguson happened, I would say relatively conscious before that. Trayvon Martin, I was like very young when Trayvon Martin was killed. And that kind of like awakened me a bit. But when Ferguson happened, it was just like, it felt like it was at my front door. So I was wholeheartedly in it and like really trying to figure out what do we do. And then just seeing disability was like constantly erased from how we talked about policing in prisons. And what I was learning was like the majority of people that was killed by police were disabled folks, and the majority of people in prison are disabled. And if you're there for long enough, you'll become disabled. Um, and then Bruce Kelly Jr. was murdered in Wilkinsburg, like a couple blocks away from where I worked, and that was like, I think the moment for me where I was just like, yeah, like I have no choice but to like kind of dedicate myself to this. Yeah, Bruce was somebody, you know, he had psychiatric disabilities diagnosed. The police were very well aware of it. At that time, I think my thinking was like, yo, if more people knew about this, if the police knew about like disability in a more intrinsic way or a more elaborate way, then they would be able to respond differently. So I'm thinking about like crisis intervention and then what happened to Bruce, like how it happened. That was kind of like uh, yeah, just like it resonated with all the stories I had heard before about like the callousness of like his murder. And then I was like really interested in like the abolition piece. Um, I would say it took me a while to get to a place to say like comfortably, like, yeah, I think we should get rid of prisons and we should get rid of police. That was like a process, but I'll pause there and just like thinking about like the disability, uh, how that shapes like one, yes, the interactions with police, but how it shapes the legal system and how it's like so directly tied to social work and to the quote unquote mental health system. Those linkages are things that like, you know, I personally experienced and then I've like explored deeply since then, I would say. And I'm still just like learning.
Go ahead, Wes.
Oh, thank you for sharing. I'm from Kansas City, as you may know. So I mean, when you start speaking on like, you know, the things, especially we always talk about just that line going up in the Midwest from Kansas City to Chicago, in a sense of like what you get when it comes to the violence and things, and even the discrimination. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot in these states, especially in Missouri. And so just love the transparency of like your like the journey, you know, of kind of where you started and what really got you invested into this work and what you're doing. And I love the context around disability within like the prison system. The fact that there are individuals with disabilities within that, you know, going to prison, you get one, you acquire one later on while you're in prison. How are you served when you get back out? How does society view you? Even how are you communicated with? Rather you are, you know, someone that's left a prison system or haven't even, you know, just coming in contact with somebody, as you were saying. It does have a large impact. And we've had conversations about you know, I think it was it Jacob Blake? The guy that got shot and got paralyzed. I remember we having a conversation about that here. And so again, just really talking about the effect of, and so yeah, I just wanted to share that because I'm paralyzed from the waist down. I've been paralyzed for 12 years from a gunshot wound to my abdomen. So like my awareness is definitely there, but it was something more or less in the streets and not conflicted with like officers or anything like that. But again, based on this conversation, I've definitely spoke in times of, you know, I drive a regular car in a sense. I'm not in a van or something that signifies me as a Black man has a disability. So we've talked about the fact of being able to just what does that contact look like if people aren't aware, or like if it's a time where I got my wheelchair in the trunk because it's been times I done forgot or my daughter done forgot, and but at the same time, like I would think I'm cool till I get to the next destination. But if I got pulled over, how do I explain to someone that I can't walk if they don't see some device? And then even if they do see the device, what would they think? And so those conversations, even for me, become weary in a sense, or that I'm afraid of, because yeah, as you said, this is an issue, and it's a major issue.
Yeah. Yeah. This is Dustin. I'm glad you lifted that too, because like I think one of the things, and like when I first got into like quote unquote prison advocacy, like I was just taking all the tools that we had learned and operated with to get disabled people out of nursing facilities, and deploying them in like prison settings. So the prisoners that I was connecting with at the beginning were like people that like viewed themselves like as disabled, like I guess like operating from like a medical or like kind of like a standard model of disability. So people that use wheelchairs, people that are blind. I got a letter from somebody that was up in Albion, which is a state prison in Pennsylvania, like the northwest corner of Pennsylvania. And it was he was in solitary confinement because he had been because his cellmate had attacked him. So he was in solitary. And he was in solitary from the prison standpoint for the protection of himself. But he was using a chair, and because of his injuries, and he couldn't turn around and like in the cell because the cell was so small. So I had connected with him. We were working together for like a year. And when he went to get out, yeah, the prison system gave him like $40 in a bus ticket. And because his disability didn't meet like the prison, like they have their own system for designating disability. It's like these 6 different categories. He didn't fall into it, although he couldn't walk. So they wouldn't even let him like have like his durable medical equipment to leave the prison. So it was like something that like I really couldn't understand. I'm like, yo, you can't walk, but they only giving you a bus ticket. Like it was so like incomprehensible to me. I'm just like, this is not how like people should be treated. But I think an important thing was, for me at least, like learning like this is how prisons exacerbate and create disability through like the mistreatment, right? Like I'm even thinking right now about like somebody like Mumia Abu-Jamal, who has been held in captivity in Pennsylvania for the past 40 some years, who Mumia had a bypass surgery 2 years ago and has had like blood pressure issues since, has psoriasis, has all these conditions, and like quite literally is like, yo, I just like want tomatoes. I want vegetables. Like, and he's not able to access the things that would allow for his heart to actually recover. So I think I moved to a place of like somebody like Mumia, which there's thousands of Mumias. Like the treatment for them is like actually to get out of prison, because the prison could never actually provide what they need to be able to respond to disability in a way that is like holistic. And the last thing I'll say on this is like, and what made me think of it was when I think about like gun violence or something, it's not like police do the same, prisons do the same. The difference is like the state has a monopoly on that violence. So the state is able to say, like in a lot of places, death penalties, right? Like we can like explicitly kill people, but it's not okay for like quote unquote citizens to do that. And then we can also like bring people into like death making institutions, like that what prisons are, architecturally built to deprive people of things that we need as humans, and then also destroy the land and the environment as well, which is like in Pennsylvania a huge thing. Like prisons are built on coal waste ash dumping sites. A lot of federal prisons are built on Superfund sites. But just like thinking about like the state having the monopoly on that violence and it being okay in the eyes of the state to like inflict violence, and purportedly like attempting to stop like community violence, right? Like, which I would argue is like a derivation of the state violence. something that actually doesn't respond to it. Like we know police doesn't like stop gun violence, right? We know
Right.
prisons don't do that.
I appreciate you sharing all that. And there's been some responses in the chats. There's a community message thanking you, Dustin, for making such important connections. And I want to add on to that wonderful connection you're making to the environment. So, there's so much synergy around all of this. So we're talking about, prison abolition. We're talking about disability justice and how it's linked to humanity. I was so privileged to sit on behalf of Open Up on the City County Task Force of Disabilities. And it's a good 2-hour-long meeting. And one of the members brought up, we were talking to a rep, Sarah and a Murado, and he was saying we need more support for those in prisons who are disabled. And little things, a hearing impaired person, if their battery goes out, they don't get a new battery for their equipment, just what you're talking about. They don't have resources that they can use to just communicate and facilitate in the prison system. And the lack of care is just absolutely horrendous. And I want to ask you, where do you see prison abolition coming in? Like, what do you see? How does that look to you?
Yeah, this is Dustin. I think those are like good questions. I feel like I've been asking those questions myself for like, like the past decade. And I think a big shift for me was like, I like we talked about, like I jumped in like, yo, we need to reform this. Like people shouldn't be treated like this. Like people shouldn't be like, having violence inflicted upon them from the police. Like all this shit is wrong, right? And so like what felt natural to me, the natural progression was like, well, how can we fix it? Like, so that was like an individual type of like journey of like, okay, you need like durable medical equipment in prison. Like, let's figure out how to do that. Now let's figure out how to get that for all of the prisoners. And I mean, after a while, you start to learn that like this is not like actually that's not the issue. Like it's a function of the system. Like it's not like it's a feature of prisons to deprive people of the things they need.
Right.
Like that's the whole purpose of it. So like in that ideology, then it's like, well, we can't actually like provide care within here. So like in Pittsburgh, for example, like when I first came into like movement work around prisons, there was a group called Allegheny Health Justice Project. And Annika, like they invited me to like the art house in Homewood where they were reading like Our Prison's Obsolete from Angela Davis. And it was like a book study to like figure out like they were becoming abolitionists. At that time, they were trying to get the healthcare provider out of the county jail because Pittsburgh had the highest rates of suicide in the nation in the jail. And they were targeting the healthcare provider because they were like not providing the treatment that people needed. And I think that what they realized like sooner than me was like, yo, this healthcare company is for profit. Any other healthcare company will be for profit as well. So in order to like actually make profit, they're going to try to cut every corner that they can. The same way that the healthcare system works outside of prisons, right? So it was like it's impossible for this thing to like actually live within the prisons, and the culture that it requires too. Like that's a thing, like I think on a spiritual level, where it's like you're putting people like humans in captivity. Like that requires like a level of culture, a level of desensitization, a level of dehumanization in order to like carry that out on behalf of the state, right? And I think it's like very twisted in a way where it's like, the DEI, like to put that onto prisons, it's like now you're wanting your own people to do it to your own people. And that is like and I would view the police the same way. And I think what has helped me with the police is community policing seems like, that would work. Like if you know people, how could you do this to them? But then if we think about like what history has told us, like, yes, you can colonize your own people, right? Like I look at like places like Liberia where quote unquote like freed African slaves were sent back to Liberia to literally colonize indigenous people. Like it is possible for these things to happen, and they have. But community policing, specifically in Pittsburgh, I mean, the idea comes out of riots after Dr. King was assassinated, where when people were getting organized, when people were fed up, where they demanded something different, the state response to that was community policing, where we're going to add more police, and the police are just going to be people that live by you. And we've watched the trajectory of what that's looked like in Pittsburgh. More police just has meant more arrest, really, more prisons. It used to be 5 prisons at that time or something around there, and now it's 30 prisons in Pennsylvania. So we know what incarceration does to people too. So I'm just like, I'm really interested in, one, the dismantling of prisons, because that is a way to meet the material needs of people, the material conditions, like get people out of these places. And then I think the question around abolition, to me, that's a question I think for all of us. It's just like, you know, I have ideas around like specific projects that work, or what a world can be without prisons, but I think we collectively need to like wrestle with that as like one, like a community, but yes, as a society. It's like, what type of world do we want to live in? Like that's the, to me, the question of abolition. And that is not just like up for me to decide, right? Like there's a lot of things. I think the Cowboys winning the Super Bowl is the world that I want to live in. The military is also not like, you know, subsidizing the NFL to, you know, play the national anthem and stuff in the name of imperialism. But I have ideas around it. But I think that's what abolition does. That's the beautiful thing, is it brings us into like the imaginative piece. And I just can't help but like think about like ancestors in that. Like there's a level of imagination that people had to have and work for in order to envision like what the world looked like without slavery.
Love what everything
feels like what the work of abolition still is.
Thank you, Dustin. I want to bring 2 things, and Wes, I'll bring it to you. One, I was so happy to see your smile when you said Cowboys, Dustin. I was like, there's that joy. And I want to correct us. If you notice, every time Dustin comes on, he says, "This is Dustin." And that's really to support our brothers and sisters who are using other forms of sensory aside from their visual to understand who's on the screen. So Dustin, thank you, because that's not a practice I have been integrating into what we've done. So this is April speaking right now. And the second thing I want to drop is the Black history. I hope you notice Dustin is dropping nuggets of Black history, and we are in Black History Month, and you cannot tease out the 2. Prison system, you look at the history of it, slavery, so connected, bringing up the connection to Liberia. I immediately thought, when you think about the riots in the Hill District, but they were not riots, they were uprisings, they were responses to what's happened. I grew up in LA right after the Watts uprising as well. And it's the same thing systemically. I'm sure Wes can bring up in Kansas City. When the community, when the folks speak up and speak out, an answer is, let's institutionalize them more, and then let's integrate them into our institutions and teach them our ways. That's Black history that we need to know. That's American history we need to know. And Dustin, you said it so beautiful. We all can come together to define abolition. Wesley, I'm done. I'm mute.
Dustin, you're a book of knowledge, you know, and we're really grateful to have you here. This is Wesley, everybody, and thank you for that. We definitely fell off April, so we're gonna have to amplify that back. So grateful for that correction. Always learning, daily learning, everybody. But absolutely, I mean, I think to sum it all up, the way you did was, what world do you want to live in? And I think I talk about that a lot, just within disability, how people create, you know, all these barriers, and then they have to face the same barriers they created at some point in their life. And so, and then they hate life, right? So it creates that perspective, because you have to face the barrier that you created So now everyone thinks that, even having disability isn't something that you can be proud of, because of all these things that are happening, but no one's seeing like the life of it is long term. You'll be experiencing the same thing I am, in some way. And so why don't we create things that's very inclusive, universal, but also being more empathetic to individuals that might be different than you. And all of it goes into history. It goes into what someone viewed the world to look like, and a lot of people have been focused on that direction, right? And so when you're trying to create all these new norms within this one norm, it becomes conflicting. But going back to just the whole, I think, like, I don't know, I'm really stuck on the prison system. I mean, we had talked, and again, this is West thinking, my life before, I ain't about to go through none of that, you know what I mean? And thinking that, maybe I get pulled over for speeding, and that's one of my worries. But I had not thought about individuals like myself that have had to go through systems, and what do they face when they're behind a bar. And if I'm already seeing how society perceives disability, there's a whole nother layer when you're in a system that already devalues a human, and so I don't know. That's just, for me, this is something that I want to even learn more about and educate and become more of an advocate. Because as a Black man, like you said at the beginning when you started talking, we know individuals that are in a system that's been life for us in some way, whether someone close, a friend, family member, or even someone from a distance. Our communities are like family, regardless how we look at it, right? And so, I mean, again, I'm more or less just grateful for the conversation, because even within this topic, like I've known individuals that have experienced the system after disability, but I never communicated with them to see how that process was, and even though individuals might come out with their head up high, you never know what that treatment was. Like the person getting the bus ticket and $40, but had to use a mobility device all the way up until they told them they had to leave. I don't know what I could do. You know what I mean? Like, I'd be crawling on the ground. Like, I don't know. It just made me.
I had that vision, and that's.
And that's the reality. And it's because some people might not understand disability. Some people don't know, when those that aren't diagnosed. I know a lot of people that are undiagnosed with disability that have something similar to MS, where they can't walk, but it's not MS. And it's sad because some people don't understand it. We talk a lot about how when you're in a wheelchair, everyone's not the same, but everyone thinks that you are. So if I know someone with CP, everybody got CP. If I know someone with MS, then you can get up and walk if you got the courage. Like it's if I only know a person that's paralyzed, everybody's paralyzed. I mean, it's one of those mindsets that society has to not be fully inclusive. This is a powerful conversation, I think, that we're having today, and I appreciate you, Dustin, for bringing it up.
Yeah, and Dustin, I saw you unmute. This is April speaking. I just want to share, if people are watching on Facebook, there's a very rich community conversation going on there. Talking about New Mexico, dropped links to Liberia. So Dustin, you've opened up this sharing, which is beautiful. So thank you for that. And I want to say, when Dustin brought up, when we look at abolition, we're talking about it being a community that makes the decision. It's like a familial decision on how we proceed. This is part of it. The three of us are here to share our experiences and our ideas and our opinions and our knowledge base, which is limited, right? Because there's a whole world out there. So thank you for continuously sharing, everyone. Please continue to do so. Dustin, I'm gonna pass the mic to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And also, Wes, like I'm just thinking about, like, as you were talking, I was like my own experience with disability was like, yeah, in like high school, like I'm going to like, psych institutions and things like that. And also like at some point, like I don't know, 1920, like being in psych institutions and also not wanting to be there. So being held uh, like beyond my control. So we, like states call it like involuntary commitment or 302s or things like that, like 5150 in California. But some people call it medical incarceration. Um, but I think I was like very fortunate to, when I started with the Center for Independent Living, like, you know, that's a place, like I said, governed, ran by, and for disabled people, which is, you know, unique in any regard, I would say. But like the people that I came up under, like Cindy Williams, who was lived in Pittsburgh for almost all of her life, as was a big part of like the ACT UP organizing um, uh, in the late 80s, early 90s, and women defense committees in West Virginia, like when she was in college, and people like Milt Henderson. And Milt used to say, Milt used the chair, had an injury like in his 20s, I think, and is from the Hill, lived in the Hill, died in the Hill, and would always used to say like, yo, they made us fight to get on the sidewalk, now we got to fight to get down it. And he would say that in reference to like, you know, bullshit like tables or restaurants popping up at sidewalks and us having to like advocate to get them removed so people can actually like get down the sidewalk. But
I was just talking about that.
I feel very fortunate to be around that culture, like of like coming into like identity around disability, and like a part of that, which I have like, I think there's a lot of contradictions there, and I have like a lot of like confliction with how like white disability rights spaces talks about disability pride. But to be like proximate to it and to kind of like get some of that knowledge was like really important. And I think it informs so much of like what we do now. And like right now, like during the pandemic, like one of the things that we witnessed is like the language around like who is vulnerable. At the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, people were saying like, yo, if you got a pre-existing condition, if you have comorbidities, if you're immunocompromised, all of this is language that is like also used when it comes to like passing healthcare legislation as well. Like very rarely do people say disability or disabled people. And that's what it all comes up to, right? Like when we're talking about all these vulnerable groups, we're saying disabled people are the people that are vulnerable, even in a pandemic, right? So in this, what we've witnessed is disabled people die in mass. In nursing facilities, like it's like 2 out of every 10 nursing home residents have died from COVID. And that's accounted for. So we know this is something that like is squarely about disability. And we also know that that is one of the reasons that people are okay with not masking. People are okay with not having like widespread state sponsored testing. People are okay with like anti-vax ideology because the folks that are vulnerable are disabled people by and large. Um, and that to me is like what eugenics looks like, right? Like eugenics was never like this fringe movement that like extremists like had this ideology. That was a mainstream movement then, and it's also like still mainstream now. Um, and so the work I'm a part of now, like really like thinks about like how do we categorize disability and for what, and the workshops that we do and like the spaces that we create. Like we're always playing like Young Thug, goddamn J. Cole, like it's playing like black artists, primarily black hip hop artists that discuss disability without using the language. So we're able to like understand ourselves as politically disabled rather than like social. We have valid reasons, especially as black people, to reject the label of disability. We see what the outcomes are when people are tracked into special education. We see what it means when women are labeled as hysterical and can be tracked into institutions. We see like what that looks like when black people resist and are called crazy. Like we know the negative outcomes, so it makes sense to me why we would reject the label.
Right.
But that's like a social model that it's been like crafted on, like or a medical diagnosis. Like forever we've had to, as black people, like be resilient, right? And like push through whatever ailments that we have. So all of that makes sense, but the political designation is important for us to organize because it allows for us to incorporate those folks without them having to self-identify. So when in the pandemic, we're saying like, we're not just saying like these like kind of esoteric groups of people, like, you know, immunocompromised, or like you gotta kind of gotta rack your brain to figure out who that is. Like we're talking about disabled people as a political class. And that's important because then we can bring in labor, then we can bring in like all of these other connections, like where a political class of disabled people, somebody profits from that. Somebody can extract labor from them. Somebody can like utilize them as like this working class of people. So then to me, what it does is allows us to see ableism is not just like a interpersonal thing. It's not just the discrimination of people with disabilities. It is like a larger system that allows for the exploitation of our people. And you don't have to be disabled to experience that. Right. Like a prison, right? It's an ableist construction. It deprives you of what you need. You don't have to be disabled to go there and then experience like what it means to not get your needs met, what it needs to not have like proper treatment and all of those things. So I'll pause there, but I'm just like thinking about like that identity as disabled. That's a thing that's like very elusive, especially to Black people. But I feel like so much of it is because it's been constructed operating from this is what disability looks like in white bodies and minds. And that has never incorporated, like the DSM is not written for Black people, right? Like
that part.
DSM is not ours. Like the DSM has actually been leveraged against us, right? To say that if you have the urge to run away from a plantation, you have drapetomania, or if you have a work stoppage on a plantation, you have rascality, or if you exhibit like dilated pupils, or your body is hot, then you have excited delirium now. Like it's been weaponized against us. So like that shit is not for us, right? Nor is it the way in which like indigenous cultures by and large have understood disability.
This is April. Thank you so much for all of that, Dustin. And I did disability justice 2-day workshop. It was a 1-day intensive. Are you still with People's Hub?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, and that was so enlightening because we're constantly learning. And all of this is a lot of stuff that you shared and you educated and you brought up. And not just you had a team that did it with you. So with that, can you share where people can find you now?
Yeah, this is Dustin. Yeah, People's Hub. We've been I've been there since 2020. I started off as like the director of the disability justice work, and I became one of the co-directors this summer. We have these spaces that one are, you know, we refer to as community care clinics for chronically ill and disabled movement folks, which is like a peer support space, but it's a space of strategy. It is a space of support. And from there, we kind of like build programs out based on like what the needs of disabled organizers are. So we have an entire cohort where there's 30 disabled folks from across the nation that are organizers working to undo internalized ableism. And we figure out how to do that collectively. Like we understand that's not like an individual like project, as we've been lied to, I feel like. So we have programs like that. We do these workshops with groups to like figure out how groups can, one, like center access in their work, and then also integrate disability into like what they're fighting for. Because we know disability lives in every single movement, and it's made up by disabled people in every single movement. So we have those programs that at People's Hub, which is all online. And it has been for 6-7 years now because we, prioritize access from the beginning for people being able to like actually be accessible. I think in the pandemic, it is like intensified, obviously, because people can't be in person for a lot of different reasons now. And then we also do solidarity economy programming, because one of the things that we know about access, and Wes, I don't know, you probably have like a lot of experience with this, is like our needs are commodified, right? So that shit is never going to be sustainable. So durable medical equipment, that shit is like, you know, thousands of dollars, or like, so we're like really interested in the anti-capitalist politic of disability justice, and saying if our needs are commodified, then we need an alternative way to get our needs met that doesn't like focus on like the financial piece of it. Like we need an alternative economy around access. And a part of solidarity economies is there's like a value set there. And one of them is participatory democracy or governance. And we also need those things for abolition, right? Like, so April, you lifted the question of like, well, this is like a community thing and we need to figure out as a community, well, we need like structures to be able to deliberate. And the access piece is important because it allows for us to assemble, and it allows for us to come together, and it's a tool that we can use. And the structures of solidarity economy like figure out, how do we do that? How do we participate? And that's what the goal is, right? Like the goal of access is not to just be accessible. Like who cares if some shit is accessible if it's the military, right? We don't want a more accessible military.
Right. Just being gate kept.
Yeah. So we want to be able to come together and like figure out how do we build a new world. Like, and that's kind of like some of the work of People's Hub. Yeah, it's made up of a bunch of people though. It's organizers from all over.
Love that. This is Wes, everybody. Thanks, Dustin. Man, listen, I think the work is really, really, really cool and empowering. It gives me a different, insight of some of the things that I can even be tackling here. I love the conversation around just we've talked about it, but I think people stop talking about it in a sense of disability being more white lensed than anything. And so I really appreciate you bringing that back up because there are a lot of people, Black individuals, that don't own up to the disability. And it's because you don't see it. You don't, it's not represented in a sense for you to own it. And it's been, that's pretty much my whole probably platform is trying to teach individuals that look like me how to own it, because I understood that it wasn't anything out there, and so I really appreciate that. And for anyone that's listening to be able to understand like that, that's why we say speak in the rooms that you don't see individuals, make sure individuals that can get in there, that can be a voice. And then make sure your advocacy is speaking for everybody and not just what you see, and so, just wanted to, again, share that. And I have a lot of more note taking that I did today to be able to make my advocacy even more impactful, just on the sense of making sure that everyone hasn't been left out, I mean, sure. This is a wealth of knowledge. You have a level of knowledge in a way that really speaks. I think that anyone that's listening, I kind of took a sneak peek at our Facebook like conversations, and I really appreciate everyone that's been putting links and things in there. Because this is a very insightful conversation for even within this month, but any day of of the year would be really good. So goodness.
This is April. You sharing the history of eugenics, which if, we have a newsletter, I can drop information in there about that. That was one of the things I studied a lot of when I was in undergrad many decades ago. As a minor at UC Santa Barbara, and it was so illuminating to me and clear that the DSM like the medical system is not for Black folks, although we were the ones who were experimented on and who were tormented on and used and disabled, right? Maimed, all these things, injected with diseases. We were the ones who were the, quote, guinea pigs to come up with solutions. We didn't come up, we were used. And yet it's not for us. And Dustin, that is really why Wesley and I came together. We really stood on this and believed in this. Like, we need to center things for Black folks because we are not being centered even in spaces that are supposed to be equitable, you know, for all. And it's so important because when you talk about equity, you look at every single person. And in looking at the trajectory of Black folks in disabled spaces, looking at the history, looking at the pain, the depth, the resiliency, it is only going to help amplify everyone. So thank you for bringing that in. And before we all came live, you know, I asked Dustin, it's like, I want to be able to tap into his resources and asked him to share others who we can have on this platform. So this will not be the last time. We're hopeful that he can share with us. With that being said, you're doing a lot of work, and we all know it can take a toll on our physical, our mental, like our entire well-being. We would love for you to share, if you feel comfortable, what do you do to take care of yourself so you continue to build your resiliency and you're able to be grounded and continue the work in this space?
Yeah, this is Dustin. I think that's like something that like I've really struggled with, like, just to be honest, especially like given like the work that I've been a part of has been in large part response to state violence, whether inside of prisons or, you know, police on the outside. And that has been it's been a learning journey. And that question of like, how do you take care of yourself is something that, like, I feel like I've attempted to like confront and approach in so many different ways. And what has felt like the most resonant for me as of late is like the transition from like thinking about that as like an individual project to one that is community. And then also like figuring out how I can be at peace with like the levels of uncomfortability that, you know, I have and experience. And like typically my nervous system right now, like, I mean, I'm witnessing, and as many people are witnessing, an active genocide. And I'm thinking about, like, yes, disability in terms of mass disablement from pandemic, but then also war as a disabling project, really, an exacerbator of disability and a creator of disability. And Palestinians have been living that for 75, 60, 75, 80 years now, right? And to know that's being done, like, with tax dollars that we pay here, genocide being carried out, is very, like, deeply unsettling. Like, and my body wants to physically like do something about it. And because of disabilities and the way I'm set up, like currently sickness, like I've been like really struggling to physically be able to respond. And I think something that has like carried me, and still continues to do that, is like that unsettling feeling that I feel knowing that people are like performing surgeries without anesthesia, or people don't have like materials because Israel is restricting what goes in and out of Gaza, as they have done for decades now, to even match the need for prosthetic limbs. To know that suffering, like, and that unsettling feeling that I have, to know that that is like what makes me human, like that's what makes me like alive, like that is like something that like I've attempted to like figure out, how do I have peace with that, and knowing that that's what I should feel. Like I feel like so much of ableism, what it does is it pathologizes what are natural responses to violence. So I think about like people that are, you know, interacting with police, and they do shit like run, or they do shit like shake, or they move quickly. Like, it's natural. Like, if the people have been killing your people our entire time here, of course I would do some quote unquote irrational shit in response to them. And that is often pathologized. People have excited delirium, or they make up shit to say like, this is the justification for me shooting that person or something. So I've come to peace with like, yes, this is like this is a natural unsettling feeling, and this is also not something that I can individually do. I can't individually be well. I need my community. I need like the peer support spaces at People's Hub to be okay. Like I need like in times of like I'm assuming I have long COVID. I've had issues for like a year and a half now. Countless like hospitals and doctors, like, but the support of community, the people that have like really educated me to be like, yo, this is the respirator to wear. This is like the antiviral that you can take. This is what you do when you know you got to get another test. Like the food we consume, like all of that is community. Like none of that is like an individual project. I think, yeah, there's things that I do, like, you know, I can, you know, do breathing techniques, or uh, I can do practices of journaling, but I learned those from people. Like, so all of it to me is like a community support. And that's a part of like what we fight for at People's Hub, is how disabled people can come together and organize, because we know we need it. Like we need each other to be well. But yeah, those are the practices I would say. So a lot of it is like, instead of organizing for things that I might typically do when I'm unwell, I organize for community, so that structure can like also be a response for some of us that can't physically do something.
This is Wesley. Thank you, Dustin. Oh man, we need each other to be well. Oh my God. I mean, honestly, the transparency there. You know, I've tried to be a lone rabbit a long time, man, and I find myself having to tell those that are close that I need them in some way. You know what I mean? Rather it's just physically being around someone to talk to, someone just to share ideas or thoughts with, but it's that community. And even within my organization that I have, like we do cohorts and everything, and we love seeing everyone push themselves. But I think the biggest thing that we found is everyone finds the most joy when we do the community events. You know, when we bring so many people that are experiencing something similar and can bring them together to be able, and then the conversations become so authentic, and you know, and it's like it's comfortable, right? Like you can be comfortable not being okay around your community, and that helps you become okay. Like you said, journaling, things like that, you learn from someone else. So I really appreciate you sharing that. I've definitely been trying to find my inner peace again lately. And that helps me. That helps a lot, even for me. Yeah, this was so good.
Well, this was really good. I do. I too appreciate your transparency, Dustin, and that's part of the road. You know, hearing your story of dealing with long COVID. You know, Wesley, like we're all disabled on this platform. It's been a year and a half where I've been diagnosed with a chronic illness, and I've had to have my community, and it was very hard for me to tell anybody because of the perceptions that I had as an ableist person who came from a fitness space. And I hear you, Dustin, when you say listening to the nervous system, listening to my body, what I can do and what I cannot do. And I think the bottom line, everyone reach out, bring your community in, or community, find ways to reach into others, because it's not an easy space for those who are in a vulnerable situation, or in a space of wanting to go within. We're better together. I think that's part of this whole thing. So my gosh, we topped on Black history, prison abolition, love, community. Listen, this was, I can't think of a better talk we could have had for Black History Month. So we honor you, Dustin. We appreciate you. Check him out at People's Hub. And even if you do a search for him, you could find information on how to connect with him. Wesley's disabled, but not really, in Kansas City. talking about journaling and learning from other people. Wes has, you have your, come on now. We're talking about economics, and let's
set the tone, right?
It's a book of affirmations, right? And journaling.
So everybody, I did just launch my gratitude journal. The goal or intention behind it was really to be able to have a Black perspective when it comes to journaling. You'd normally find journals and they don't have a lot of stories or anything. You go to this journal, you get my personal story, or at least a bit of it, but you get my gratitude part of my journey to express why it's important to start to practice these things. A few lessons on affirmations, and then you got daily prompts, quotes, but I was intentional about making sure that we had quotes from Black leaders and today's Black leaders, that you look up to, so that when you do look at within this, you might find a quote from, Lena Waithe or Barack Obama, or, James Baldwin or Ava. I was intentional.
Nipsey Hussle, your favorite, right?
Oh, we got Nipsey and Jay-Z in here too. Don't play. we got them in here too. I was trying to be humble, but absolutely Oprah, anyone, but that was my intention. So it's on all my platforms. If y'all want to check it out, Set the Tone, a daily journal for cultivating gratitude.
Thank you. And this is April again. You can also, if you're in the Pittsburgh area or greater Allegheny County, Open Up Pittsburgh is in Lawrenceville, and it's a space that centers mindfulness. And there are a lot of different classes, virtually, in person. We're ADA accessible. We're open for every single human being that wants to walk into the door. We provide access, and we really are looking to support community in these integrated spaces, and also offer resources. So just thank you for connecting. And Dustin, do you have any closing thoughts you want to share with everyone before we come off?
Yeah, this is Dustin. One, just appreciate y'all for this conversation. Also, I definitely need a gratitude book or affirmation book, so I'm gonna look into that. And and I mean, this is for Pittsburgh and everywhere too. I think right now is it's like one of those moments again, and I feel like it's been that, maybe that's what life is. I don't know. It's what do you do in times of great travesty, and it feels very important for people to be involved, to be in the streets safely, as safe as possible, and advocating for the freedom of Palestinians. This is a genocide that's currently happening. We know it's an occupation. It's been that for years, and it's intensified and escalated, and it continues to do so with Israeli and United States aggression. So in Pittsburgh, there's the Pittsburgh Palestine Coalition. In other places, there's USPCN or Arab Resource Organizing Center or Palestinian Youth Movement. There's people organizing everywhere around this, as there's always been, and there's more people now, which is good. But we need to this is the people will stop this. The people will get people free, and the connections between disability and this is very apparent. And one, it's mass disabling, yes, and also the consequences of this we'll live with for a very long time. So however you can get involved in that, please get involved, and I can share resources and all of those things too if that's helpful.
This is
one thing I will say is Jasbir Puar's book on the right to maim. If you need to intellectualize this for some reason, Jasbir Puar wrote a book maybe 10 years ago, Right to Maim, that talks about difference in debility and disability in Palestine or under occupation.
Right to Maim.
I appreciate y'all.
We appreciate you too. Thank you for those closing words. This is April again. And we look forward to staying connected. And happy Sunday, everyone. Keep your heart safe. Be with community. Continue to learn and educate and share during this Black History Month. celebrate the Chiefs. Find your joy, and keep them in mind as well as they suffer tragedy. And the tragedy that came from suffering as well. You know, there are many places throughout this world. We talk about Palestine. We're talking about the Congo. Read an article today about Russian soldiers who are not being given the right prosthetics and support after they've been maimed and disabled in war. There's just a lot going on. We have to take care of ourselves, because in doing so, we'll take care of others. So happy Sunday, everybody. Thank you for coming to Open Spaces. We appreciate you. Thank you for joining us and listening to the podcast. If you would like more information on the guests and the stories that you've heard today, and to hear stories from others, subscribe to the podcast. We also invite you to subscribe to Open Up Pittsburgh's newsletter, as well as our YouTube channel. We want you all to take care, and remember to make your own stories. This is April. Peace.